I'm McKinney Smith. In 2009, while going through a divorce, I decided to jump straight into entrepreneurship. In 2012, I lost my sister and asked myself, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Since then, I've become a serial entrepreneur, helping other women publish their books, produce their podcasts, and reach their big goals to walk in their greatness. I realized the importance of sharing our stories of resilience and how it can be another's guide to walk in a manner worthy of their calling. We are blessed to be a blessing, so get ready to be blessed with an inspiring testimony. Hey, Legacy Leavers. Thank you for joining us on the Walk in My Stilettos podcast, the top 1.5% most popular show in the world, where we have conversations with extraordinary women. They're letting us step into their shoes. I help women to own their voice so they can create impact, prosperity, and legacy. I get inspired when I see another woman succeeding, but what interests me more is her backstory and her mindset on how she got there. So today's guest is about to bless us with her testimony, and since you're already here, you may as well subscribe. Today we have Nadine Liverpool. She is a former TV broadcaster turned marketing strategist. She spent 10 years working in sports media for some of the biggest networks in Canada. This former NCAA Division I soccer player has also been seen on MTV and NBA TV, as well as Flow Sports throughout the Caribbean. She now works in the creator economy and is helping grow community at Jabber, one of the fastest growing tech companies in Canada. Please welcome to the show, Nadine Liverpool. Thank you for joining us and agreeing to share your story with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure to be able to share my story on your podcast.
I'm excited. I mean, we've been following each other for a while on social media. I believe we've seen each other out at like events and stuff, but I'm always excited when I get to learn deeper someone's story. It makes me feel more connected to that person and more inclined to support and do my best to bring awareness to what you're doing and the difference that you're making in the world. So I'm just grateful that we're able to have this conversation and ready to jump right in.
Yes, let's do it. Let's get deep and emotional and all that.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to give a little quick backstory to the listeners. Actually, before I do that, let's start with an icebreaker question, because I believe that kids have these vivid imaginations, and when they are little, they want to be all these things. They want to be astronauts and firefighters and all these things before society starts to limit their belief of who they can be. And then as adults, we end up in these careers or paths, sometimes not necessarily what we even want to do, but because of something that happened to us or because of an expectation of someone else or society or maybe what our parents wanted us to do. So I would love to know, like, what did you want to be as a little girl?
I think this is a great question because I actually thought about this the other day. And with all of that stuff you're saying, where like your parents and like what they project onto you and try to force you to be, which is basically like an extension of themselves. But for me, when I was a little girl, I actually wanted to be a teacher. And because I'm really into books, and I think like looking back at me as a child, like reading and writing and learning was my escapism, like I would say my chaotic childhood and my environment. And that was the way that I kept myself safe. So I was like, oh, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. But it didn't necessarily go that way. I kind of followed the path that my mom and my dad wanted me to become, which was to be a soccer player and to work in television. And I already have both of those checked marked. But I think I'm now getting back into a place where I am wanting to reconnect with my inner child and like the things that I was passionate about and why I've gotten to like into coaching and stuff like that in terms of like marketing and consulting. And I think that's me making that, I would say, pivot or like 180 back into like who I really am.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So tell us the journey of how you got into being a marketing strategist?
I would say, in terms of me deciding, like from a career perspective, I would say I always played sports my whole life. So I was a top athlete and played for the Canadian national team in high school, went away to school on athletic scholarship. And when I returned back to, so when I graduated from university and I moved back to Toronto, I actually did a postgraduate program in sports media because I wanted to become a sports broadcaster. But the thing was, back then, I was like, well, how do I get exposure? How do I get people, especially I'm not only a female, I am a Black female living in a predominantly white country that is Canada. How do I get these people to see that, hey, I got personality, I know sports, like you guys should hire me? And at the time, one of my friends was like, hey, you should start a YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, really? I start a YouTube channel? Like, do what? And they're like, just pop out a camera and start talking about sports, start talking about things you like. So that's exactly what I did. I started a YouTube channel. And back then I didn't know anything about like talking on camera, recording with video equipment, editing, any of that stuff, or even knowing how to promote myself on social media. Like, how do I build a community? How do I, start an email list? Like, how do I do that? I didn't know any of those things. So I think my like journey to becoming a marketing strategist actually started with me in my pursuit of becoming a sports broadcaster in sports media. So everything that I learned in terms of like, how to use YouTube and how to, use Twitter and LinkedIn and all these social platforms, a lot of it was self-taught. And over time, I was like, okay, I have to create a website. I need to learn WordPress. I need to learn this tool and that tool. And then eventually I ended up kind of like taking actual classes so I can actually get a job in the marketing industry. So I actually went back to school at University of Toronto and took like a digital marketing course. I even did like HubSpot courses for like SEO, like Google, like for like I would say like PPC and like Facebook ads and like all the digital marketing stuff. And that kind of primed me for making the pivot into marketing once I decided I didn't want to work in sports media anymore. So when I did make that transition, it was really, I wouldn't say it's easy, but I kind of, at the same time, working in sports media, I was always doing things in marketing on my own as well.
Wow. So I love hearing the pivot and how you got into your business industry. And for those listeners that are listening, actually, I might have put a trigger warning here just in case, because we don't know where this conversation is going to go. But you and I are going to discuss more things about our personal and relationship experiences. So I had posted about, well, by the time this airs, it'll, be a few weeks, but I had posted a status, one sentence that said, I dated the Toronto Tinder swindler. And by the time this airs, there will be a full episode with full details of my experience. So they can go back and listen to that episode if they want to get into what this is about in full detail. But you commented on the post that I posted after that and said that you dated someone who is a combination of both the Tinder swindler and Inventing Anna.
Yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yes. So for those who are listening, quick backstory. The Tinder Swindler is basically, it's a documentary of real life experience. He used Tinder to meet women and basically financially abuse them. He would fake these emotional connections in order to take advantage of them. And he would take advantage of them through large sums of money, getting them to take out loans and credit cards and so on and so forth. And I have yet to watch Inventing Anna, but I believe I know, like, she basically is a fraud.
Yeah, she basically lied about being like a German heiress. So like changed her name and basically created a whole new identity in order to scam people.
Right. So you and I have both dated different versions of these people. And the reason I'm laughing about it, and I feel that I can at this point, because I feel that I've healed from the experience to a point where I can speak about it without feeling hurt or overly emotional. And I think that's a good point that we can get into after about the healing process. But I know from my DMs after that one post, there are so many women that have had very similar experiences and feel embarrassed or ashamed to speak about it because either they feel they're the only ones that have gone through it, or they feel like, oh my God, how could I have believed this person, or any of those things. And I've read a lot of articles where clinical psychologists and stuff are saying, like, you can't continue to further victim shame the victim. Like, we need to focus on the abuser and what they did and not add on more trauma to the person that experienced it. So I want you to share as much of your experience as you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, and just to give you backstory into kind of like me as being a female and my dating past, like I'm that person that just falls really quick, right? And I'm just genuinely a good-hearted person. So I think when I'm in that beginning lovey-dovey, technical terms, love bombing stage, I'm very like, oh my gosh, they're just like me. Not realizing like that niceness that I know I am like 100%. This person's just kind of, putting on a show, right?
They're mirroring what you want.
Right, exactly. So in my situation, like with like my past relationship, I was basically talking kind of like, I would say, rekindled the friendship with someone who I had known for a very long time. Someone who I'd known from since I was like 12 years old. And we hadn't talked for a while, but we started talking on like BBM. For those of you who remember, like BlackBerry Messenger, talking back and forth. And it kind of grew into us becoming close friends. And then it grew into something more romantic. But at the time when we were talking back and forth, whether it was on BBM or with video chat on WhatsApp, he was actually living in Trinidad and I was living in Toronto, Canada. So in a way, it was pretty much a long distance, right? And at the time, I was going through a lot in terms of like my career, and I just felt like I needed a change. So he was like, well, why don't you come move down to Trinidad? Because again, like I am also of Trini descent. So even though I was born in Toronto, Canada, both my parents are from Trinidad. So I was like, okay, you know what? Like, at the time I had like just quit my job. I was going to do something different. And that's when I was trying to pivot into marketing. And I was like, okay, you know what? It was in a period where I'm like, I can just move and I can figure this out. And because I was like, at the time we were dating, I was like, okay, I'm going to make this move. So I actually moved to Trinidad. And I remember when I moved down there, that was the moment that I could tell like, he was acting a bit different, maybe in the sense that he had like, he had caught the prey. So it's like, what's the point of like keeping the mask on, right? Mm-hmm. But I just decided, no, maybe he's just in a bad mood, or, maybe it's something that I said, like always thinking it's my fault. Well, maybe he's just an asshole, right? But yeah. I wasn't really seeing those red flags back then, right? Because I was still in this kind of like gaga love bombing kind of phase. And I would say like over that period of like dating him, I had learned that, as I said, kind of to go back, like he's actually from Toronto, but was actually born in Trinidad, but he had moved to Canada. So in terms of like relating this to kind of like Inventing Anna, like he had actually moved to Trinidad and had changed his name. So a lot of people down there don't know what his real name is. And like to this day, he's still, living this double life of pretending that he's X when he's actually Y, right? So I had learned that he had like done a lot of, I would say, fraudulent things up here in Canada, and he had gotten charged for it, and he was put on probation for a few years, and he kind of felt that he didn't want to do probation, so he fled and he moved to Trinidad. So a lot of people who are down there don't even know that backstory from him, right? They just think, oh yeah, he just moved down here. Like, no, there's a lot more to his story than just that. But when I like learned all these things and I was down there, it was one of those things where like, I felt I was so deep into it, in the sense that like I had moved, I am down there, like and I'm like learning all these things as we go, I kind of said, well, okay, I'm just going to accept these things and stay with him. So while I was in Trinidad he also did help me get my work permit so I could work in Trinidad. And that's when I would say most of the abuse really started, because I had actually gotten a really good job in Trinidad working as a sportscaster for Flow Sports. And the reason I was able to do that is because he was able to sponsor me and actually get a work permit for me. But with that, over time came, I do X for you, well, I want Y. And I kind of felt, well, of course I would do this for him because he did this for me. And one of the things that he wanted that I agreed to was he wanted to quit his job to start his own business. So I was like, okay, trying to figure out what his plans were. And he didn't really have much of a plan, but because I'm like, well, he helped me, I want to help you. I told him to quit his job, and basically he started his own business, and he actually needed rent for the storefront, and I paid for the rent for the storefront. And at the same time, I was paying for the rent for our place, and I was paying for our groceries and everything. And I had to pay for inventory. And I wasn't just doing that. I was also the person building his website, teaching him about marketing. I was the brand strategist, the business, everything, right?
I'm nodding because I'm like, yep, been there.
Right? And at first, you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to do this because, I love this person. And I really and truly, I was like, I see the potential in him. And that was my biggest, I would say, mistake that I made in this terms of I fell for his potential. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact I knew what I was capable of. And I knew the type of guy that I, in my mind, knew I wanted to be with. And I knew that he wasn't there. But because I believed in myself so much, I knew if I poured into him and do what I needed to do for him, he would get to where I needed him to be for me, right? Mm-hmm. So as much as I could say to myself, oh, I did all of this stuff for him, yes. But I think a part of it was I was doing it for myself too, right? Because if I had done nothing and invested anything into him, what would he have been doing with his life? Would I have been okay being with somebody like that? No. So right. Of course, in my mind, I'm going to invest my time, my money, and my resources into this guy that technically I moved to another country for. This has to work out. I'm not going to move all the way to Trinidad and it not work out, right? So I would say over time, in terms of I would say the first few months of it was fine because he was, building his business. He was having customers coming in and everything was okay. But then after a few months, I just noticed, okay, the store is open 5 days a week. Why are you only going in 2 days a week this week? Things, if it was on a weekend and I'm like, hey, do you want to work on some stuff? Oh no, you just want to watch TV and do nothing. Mm-hmm. But we still have to pay the rent every single month. Who's paying for that? Right. Of course, I'm paying for that, right? And then over time, you kind of just realize this person never ever really had what it took to become the person that in your mind thought they could be, because they never were that person, right? And you start to become resentful. And I think in my situation, he started becoming resentful of me because I was succeeding within my career, right? I was a sportscaster for Flow Sports. To give you some context on Flow Sports, we are the network and the show I worked for. We were the first HD sports network in Trinidad. We were broadcast in over 25 countries. So I had fans all over the Caribbean. In some ways I was a mini celebrity. I don't like using that word, but in that sense, a lot of people knew who I was. It was getting a lot of traction and I was getting a lot of opportunities. And the rate that I was progressing in Trinidad compared to him was a lot faster. But when I look back, of course it would, right?
You put in the work.
I've been an athlete since I was 8 years old. As I talk about being the national team, scholarship, all of those things, like, why wouldn't I be progressing at that rate? But a lot of times when it comes to, I would say, the constructs of like patriarchy and misogyny, in the sense that like he's a man and, I'm a woman, that right there in his mind probably thinks, no, if I'm a man and you're a woman, I should be doing better than you. Right. Yeah. And what ended up happening was, even though I was, progressing in my career and his business wasn't growing the way that it was growing, he also was expecting me to be his mom and his grandma within the house. Right. And he weaponized kind of, I would say, the ideals of being a woman. And he would say things to me like, oh, it doesn't matter that you're paying for my business and you're paying all the bills. Like, you still need to, maintain the house. So a phrase he actually said to me, which was always stuck with me, he said to me that his grandma told him, if you don't take care of home, a man will roam. And I joked back and I said, well, if you don't take care of your wife, she gonna find a new life. And I pushed back a bit. But the thing is that was in his mind as to like what your duty is as a woman in this home. And it wasn't until later, when things got worse in terms of him becoming more emotionally abusive and even me leaving the relationship, where I learned that the reason why he thought that me financially providing wasn't enough is because growing up in Toronto, his mother financially provided for him. So he's very spoiled, right? So he got those financial spoils as a child, but didn't have an emotional connection with his mother. So now that I'm doing the same thing in that regard, he looks at it as like, well, that's not enough, right? And then on the flip side of it, while he being financially spoiled and having a mom who let him do whatever he wanted, the mom learned that from her mother, so his grandmother. So when I lived in Trinidad and was around his grandmother, I noticed that the grandmother would do everything for him. The grandmother would clean his clothes, cook for him. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But when you're doing it 100% and letting him do what he wants and do as he
enable them.
Right. She was an enabler.
Yeah.
And so now that we're together, he's looking at me like, well, this is what I'm used to, right? I'm used to women taking care of me. I'm used to being able to do whatever I want. I'm used to being able to access your money, to being able to access your mind, being able to access your body, everything. Like, that's his normal. So that's where the friction continued with him. And then it just started becoming, I would say, emotionally abusive, where every time and anything I did, he would try to bring me down. Yeah. It could one day he finds a dish that wasn't cleaned well enough. Okay, I wash the dishes better. The next day, it's because I didn't, maybe sweep the floor. The next day, there's always something else that they find to kind of pick on you, to basically break you down. Yep. And make you feel that you're the problem. And your role in life is to actually cater to them. And I would say when it started deteriorating even more, I remember there was a time where I realized I couldn't financially keep up with everything, right? Again, I was saying I was paying for all the rent and bills in the house. I was paying for his store's rent and all of that stuff. I just financially couldn't take care of it. And I said to him, I was like, hey, I really think you may need to go get a part-time job, right? To help out. Maybe it's something you do on the weekends. Maybe you could go be a bartender or something, but I need the help.
Yeah.
His reaction was he flipped out and he went crazy. And I had never seen something like that before, where he was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You know what? I want you to get the hell out of the house. I don't want you to be here. You're not for me. I knew you were never for me. Just because I I realized for the first time in our relationship, actually laid down a boundary. And I said, no, I can't do this. I need help. And looking back, the fact that he reacted like that, I wonder if any woman in his life has laid down any sort of boundary with him, for him to react like such a toddler as he was, right? But end of the day, I now learned like he is emotionally a toddler, and he does have arrested development in terms of his emotional development. But at that moment, he was ready. I thought he was going to hit me or do something violent to me just because I told him no. And at that moment, like I knew I had to like get out of the relationship. And I think when you've given so much to somebody and they can sense that you are pulling away, I feel like energetically it gets very dangerous in that type of relationship, because the abuser, can tell that a shift is happening. And I found that from that moment on, like things just continued to get worse and to get worse and to get worse. And it got so bad that one night he tried to kill me.
Wow.
Now, yeah. So what ends up happening, I don't want to get too graphic with it, but essentially what he did was he raped me and he left me on the bed. Basically, I think like he thought that he had killed me, because something for me and how I got through it was when I could tell what was happening. And it's something where when a man is in that sort of state, something comes over them. And I don't know how to explain it, but it's like, I don't know if it's like a demon or devil like comes over them, but it's something where you can just tell that you're in danger. And even like the type of sounds that was coming out of him, it was so demonic that my initial like response was to just freeze. And I like totally dissociated from my mind, my body, and everything. And I've learned after like reading up on stuff that basically your body does that when it's preparing for an attack. And in some ways, I feel like that, like me doing that, like saved my life. And I basically dissociated and just let him do what he had to do. And I remember I just laid there on the bed and I didn't scream. I didn't move. And he just walked out of the room. And I remember I just laid there for hours, Nikini, like I did not move. I was in shock. After that happened, he actually got my phone. And because my phone at the time, you needed to put your thumb on it to open it. While I was like passed out, I wasn't passed out. I was just like fading away, because that's the only way my mind knew to like pretend I was like dead.
Yeah, it's a trauma response.
Yeah, he took my thumb and opened my phone, like with my thumb. So the fact that he did that, I know that he thought that I was gone. He never checked me once. After he did whatever to me, he never pushed me. He never checked anything. He just left me there. And what I had learned after is that the next morning, so, and I'm kind of going all over the place because it's been a while, but basically in the morning, I decided to wake up. And when I had woken up from what had happened, he like flipped out and he was acting up in terms of like, he couldn't understand like why I had woken up. And knowing that I like got through that moment, like I just started like having anxiety and a panic attack. And it was just like a lot. I don't know how to explain it, but when you go through something like that, it's just so traumatic because you realize that this person literally like you're been sleeping with the devil like the whole time, right? And when that happened, I actually like had a nervous breakdown. I was so disoriented because I didn't understand how I survived. I didn't understand how this guy was still here and he was about to like attack me again, knowing that I had survived what he did to me. And what he did was he actually called like my aunt and uncle to tell them that I was acting out, when in reality, like I had just been raped and I didn't know how to deal with this trauma. And it ended up taking me to the hospital in Trinidad. And I remember when the nurses were asking me what happened, he was right there. No, yeah, my family did, right? Because I didn't know how to, I was so afraid as to like, well, if I tell my family what happened, like, what's he going to do? Right. So when we were in the hospital, he was like right beside me the whole time. So I didn't feel comfortable telling a nurse what he had done, because if I say what happened, he may attack me, he may attack the nurse. You don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I was so worried about what he would do is because I've had an abusive relationship before in the past. And this isn't the first time I had gone through this. I'd actually gone through this from when I was 18 years old, before I had like gone away to school in the States, where I was in an abusive relationship where I ended up running into an LCBO looking for help because I was so afraid for my life. And my boyfriend at the time, when I was 18, ran into the LCBO with like following me, and ran into the office where I was, and not only started beating me up, but started beating up the manager as well. Yeah. And he ended up getting charged, and I ended up getting a restraining order. So when all this stuff was happening again, it was kind of like deja vu.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, gosh, I clearly have not healed from what happened to me when I was younger, if I'm, in the same situation again. And essentially, after everything had happened, I was able to leave the relationship. I had to tell after I was more, I would say, oriented and could really articulate my thoughts, told my family, and I ended up leaving. But upon leaving, the problem, one of the biggest things that I would advise women is like, don't have a joint account with somebody. Mm-hmm. So we had a joint account. I tried to take out some money before I actually left him. But when I did leave, the first thing that he did was take money out of the account. And he took all the money that we had left.
Wow.
He didn't think about, oh, I'm sad that she is leaving. All he thought about was, I need to protect myself. So he took all the money that we had. Then the next thing that he did, which I was prepared for, was he canceled my work permit. And he basically tried to like bribe the immigration down in Trinidad to try to arrest me. And luckily, when I talked to immigration, they were like, okay, we could clearly see what this guy's trying to do. And they didn't do anything. But essentially, it was like he kept harassing me. He literally kept going back to immigration to try to get them to hurt me. And I think his obsession with immigration and trying to get me get me deported or something like that. I think it had to do a lot with the fact of what his situation was with him leaving Canada to come to Trinidad. And in the fact that like he made that decision to kind of leave. I honestly, at this point, I don't even know if that's 100% true. That's what he's told me. Mm-hmm. I've heard other stories, people saying that he could have gotten deported from the Canadian because of the fact he is a born Trinidadian. So there's two sides to it. And I think he wanted to hurt me the way I guess maybe he felt hurt or by the fact that he made this decision to move to Trinidad, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, I had to stop working at Flow Sports because of what happened. And even though my work at the time was going to sponsor me so I can continue working at Flow, I was like, okay, I'm going to come back to Toronto and, wait it out while my papers are in order. But after everything I had been through, like not a lot of people know the extent of what happened. Some people just think, oh, he just canceled her work permit and that's why she left. I'm like, no, there's a lot more to it than that. But within I would say the 3 months I was back in Toronto, I was like, Nadine, is it really worth it to go back to Trinidad, just for this job? And one of the things that I think is the most dangerous part about being in Trinidad for me is the fact misogyny is such a big, I would say, practice thing in Trinidad, in the sense of the fact that a lot of women in the Caribbean are being abused, on a daily basis. And a lot of these abusers are in high ranking positions, whether they're police officers or work in the government and stuff like that. So the fact that I would say, even though I got out of my situation okay, that my ex was able to manipulate a lot of people down there so easily is what was frightening to me. was the fact that, yes, he, technically he's a born Trinidadian, but because he has this Canadian accent, people are so quick to believe, okay, well, he's a foreigner. He must be somebody important, right? Kind of just like with Inventing Anna. I know you haven't seen it, but she has this German accent. She's pretending to be a German heiress. She must be someone important. And it's the same thing that he's doing down there, like pretending that he's this, and that, and being able to kind of swindle people. And I think for me, I was that person that was kind of like, I fed into the lie and I fed into this fantasy of like wanting to make it work, that I, in some cases, look at it like I enabled him to kind of think that he could, I would say, take advantage of people, right? Because if I'm there with him, if I'm willing to be, his partner in this, then I'm a willing participant, right? And me leaving is basically saying like, I no longer want to be a part of whatever you're trying to do, and he just couldn't handle it. But in terms of like the bunny part, one of the things that I learned when I moved back to Toronto was like, I spoke to some of his family members. I even, spoke to some of his child mothers. And what was crazy is that even some of his aunts even messaged me and personally, like on Facebook, and was like, I'm so glad you left. He's been very dangerous since he was a child. You have such a bright head on your shoulders. Like, don't worry about this. Like, this is his own family, right? And when it came to money, one of his family members told me that he's been stealing money from since he was a kid, from like in high school, and how there were, I don't want to get too specific without calling this particular person out, but essentially he at one point had taken his one of his family members' ID and taken his ID to a bank and said like, hey, look, we have the same last name. So-and-so said I can come to the bank and get money for them. And because he had the same last name as the person, the bank, gave him the money. And he like
here in Canada?
Yeah, here in Canada. And he took thousands of dollars was able to access thousands of dollars of the person's account. And he did this when he was like 16 years old. And it's so weird, Makini, too, that like it's always when you leave somebody or you leave a relationship where people are willing to come out the woodwork and talk to you about their stories.
I'm upset right now, okay? Because ever since I posted that status on Facebook, the amount of DMs that I have gotten from family members of this person saying, this is their track record. They have a habit of using women as bank machines. Family members saying they are trash, all this other stuff from people that I have grown up with that either knew him or knew of him and knew of multiple, not just one, but multiple other women that he has financially taken advantage of and then ghosted. And they said nothing until after the fact.
Yeah, no, it's always like that. And I find that like, I don't know, sometimes I find even with people who told me that like I looked at them like they were, I would say, a friend somewhat. I'm just like, are you really my friend if you didn't tell me or warn me about anything, before I even like moved to Trinidad? Like you didn't feel the need to say anything. And I think for me, the reason why I was willing to like forego the red flags that I did see in him before I moved to Trinidad is because I always give people the benefit of the doubt, in the sense like we all have a past, right? Like I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, and I'm willing to kind of say like, okay, based on the time that we've talked together, yes, I may know some things from your past, but like if you didn't have any story from your past, then I would be, that's a red flag too, Yeah. So I just think sometimes like I think a lot of times people are like, well, that's their decision, but you never know. Like you could save someone's life and save so much heartache and, lost time by letting this person know what you know. Like even if they're, not your friend, or you see them maybe post if they're on Facebook or something, right? Like I would be so appreciative if someone were to tell me something that could have saved me from all that heartache.
Exactly. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I have asked the people that know multiple women that the person that I had this interaction with have dated, to see if they'd be interested in coming on and sharing their side of the story, because I feel like everyone feels so ashamed about what happened to them and nobody wants to talk about it. So the abuser gets to continue this pattern. Us not putting certain things out there, where whatever narrative the abuser is giving people, because they're master manipulators, they're liars, they're excellent at triangulation, where they will tell you one thing so that you never want to go to ask another person or that, they have an interaction with something. And they'll tell that person something about you. So you two will never speak to get the pieces of the puzzle to connect the actual truth. So us having this open conversation, for me, is about awareness for another woman who stumbles across this information, or maybe someone even within our network, because both of us are considered like local public figures. So if someone hears our story, maybe they see this person dating someone that they know, and they could say, hey, this person's ex, this is the experience that they had with them. Just be careful. Like, if I could save someone's life just through sharing my story, I am going to do so. And I think sometimes people feel, and I don't know if it's ego, if it's hurt, I don't know what it is, but it's almost like they're so focused on themselves that they're not willing to save, many other people. And I'm not saying that you need to drown in order to save anyone else, but if you can help prevent someone from experiencing PTSD, complex PTSD, all kinds of additional layers of trauma. Like some of the stories that I've gotten in my DM about women that this person has dated, he left them suicidal and in financial ruin. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like the first 3 months when I first realized what was going on and we split, I was in the same position. So you could save somebody's life. You know what I mean? Like listening to your story, I kept nodding my head because it was very similar to my story. And I was speaking with another public figure yesterday, and she was sharing her story. And she's openly talked about dating the Nigerian version of the Tinder swindler. And he almost got her to move away. And like, there's so many parts of our stories that are very similar, that if we had either heard or had some form of awareness, we may have been able to prevent certain things from happening. And for anyone who is listening, like I feel sometimes people, if they don't know certain details or they're uneducated on certain things, their perspective or their narrative that they build in their head based on the information can go left. But anyone who wants to go and do any research, whether on narcissistic abuse in relationships, any form of domestic abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, there's all different levels of abuse. I find if it's not physical, it's almost like, especially in the Caribbean community. And even though in the Caribbean community, there are many things that are considered normal, but it's very traumatizing. Some cultures, physical abuse may be normal, but it's not okay. But if you were to say to someone, well, I was abused, they say, well, if they didn't hit you, if you don't have a black eye, you don't have a bruise, that wasn't abuse. No, that's not true. Financial abuse can take many different forms, and sometimes it can be more subtle than physical, verbal, or emotional abuse, but it is abuse. I was looking up some of the different ways that people can be financially abused. And it's like, I've had different types of relationships where I've experienced financial abuse myself. And there could be the type where they make all the money and they don't want you to work because they want to be able to control you and, see what you're spending and do all those things. And then in our case, it's like they refused to work and forced you to take care of all the financial obligations in the relationship. That is a form of abuse.
I think with him, like, it did work, right? It was the fact of the matter. It was like feeding me this fairy tale that he was going to become something that we both knew he was not capable of, Mm-hmm. And like, even if he was struggling, it was like, well, it's your responsibility to fix my problems. The fact that I'm not working as hard as I should be to achieve this stuff, right? Yeah. Where again, well, that's what he's used to. He's used to, no matter what problems that he's in, there's always a female that he can run to bail him out. Yeah. Whether it's a mom, whether it's a female cousin, whether it's a grandma, whether it's an aunt, he knows that he can run to, let's be honest, weak woman in order to fall for his sob story, to do whatever he wants, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like when you were telling your story, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can relate. And you mentioned a point where, you were rising to different levels of success, and you were building much quicker than he was. And he may have felt threatened by that success. And I don't know if your experience was the same as mine, but I had that same experience where not only am I trying to build this person and help them start fresh every minute with financing, what they're building, but they felt threatened by the gap in success per se. So I know initially when we broke, this person was telling people that, they got tired of standing in my shadow or playing the supporting role, that they needed to focus on themselves. But then now hearing from the family of the present woman that he lives with, his excuse was that I wanted him to be home. I needed him to be home. And I said that, I couldn't stand to be away from him. I needed him to like not work. And I'm like, have you even Googled me? Do I look like the type? Like that doesn't like measure up. The math is not mathing. So when it comes to like lies and stuff that are told, did you find when you came back and you learned the truth and you got the other pieces of the puzzle, that the triangulation and the stories that were being told, like this person was just trying to make themselves look better and destroy your character?
Yeah, because I think when you're dealing with any sort of narcissist, there's going to be the smear campaign like after the follow, like after the breakup, because they need to repair their false self and their false image. So I think the difference between me and him was he ran off trying to like do all this stuff professionally to prove that like he was the sane one, where like I did the opposite. I was like, I don't want to date anyone. I need to go to therapy. I need to like really dig deeper into this, into like my childhood, how I was raised, how I was even groomed into abuse and stuff like that. But in terms of like what you're saying, in terms of like him actually like running a smear campaign, he lied and told people, oh, she was using me so she could work at Flow. Or so he was basically saying that I was only with him for my job, which wasn't the case because we were together before I had this job. Right. You know what I mean? And if I cared so much about my job, which he claims that I did, wouldn't I have moved back to Trinidad to continue working at Flow Sports if it was that important to me? You know what I mean? So they're always going to find stories and things to say to make it seem like you're the unstable one, right? And what I've learned is that anyone who's willing to believe their story is somebody that you do not want in your life at all.
Right.
And for me, living down there, it's a lot of people were believing his story. Even some of my own family members were falling for his lies. I even had a family member who sent my mom an email of a Facebook post my ex posted about all the things he's doing in his business. And this was an aunt who knew that he had raped me and tried to kill me, right? But for some reason, you saw a Facebook post. What does that mean? Do you now think he's a good person? Like, do you know what I mean? People are very, very impressionable. And I think what the situation that I went through, it really exposed, I would say, family members in my life who I said, they're no good for me. And it doesn't matter if you're my aunt, my uncle, my cousin, if you are willing to believe his side and you don't want, and you are willing to kind of smear my name, then there's no need for us to even communicate. So right. I went as far as blocking them, their phone numbers. I blocked my family members, certain family members, not all, on Facebook, on Instagram, on social media. I even put filters in my Gmail to say if this person emails or these keywords come in, like delete the message right away. Like when I say I went no contact, it was beyond no contact with my ex. It was no contact with anyone who was toxic in my life. ex, family, or friends.
I can totally resonate with that. First of all, I should have said this already. Like, I'm sorry you even had to go through that experience. I can't even, no matter how our stories may be similar, like I can't even imagine what you went through and what you had to work through and heal from. So I'm sorry you had to experience that. On the other side, where, you talked about in order to go no contact and to heal, and the lengths that you had to go to remove toxic people in general from your life. I commend you for that, because I know how difficult that can be, because I had to do the same thing. And during my healing process, I realized that I had childhood wounds that I didn't know were there until I started doing the work on myself, realizing, like you said, where you're groomed from a child to not honor your feelings and speak up and certain things. So in learning to do so, I had to as well block family members and remove people from social media and create boundaries to protect my sanity and to learn healthy boundaries, to honor myself and practice self-love, but also so that I don't continue to make those mistakes, because you and I have both had more than one toxic relationship. And I know when you filled out the questionnaire for the podcast, you've always been quote unquote successful, right? And it's like, we're doing so well in one area of our life, but then we have this track record when it comes to toxic relationships. But I think that these abusers target women like that because they're like, oh, well, the one thing that they're actually missing. So let me pretend to be who I think that they want me to be until they can no longer maintain that role. And then the mask comes off and then you see their true selves, right?
I actually saw a video that talked about like narcissistic abuse, and it gave me a lot of context into like those childhood wounds and like where they really reside. And it really comes down to your mom or your dad. And I think anyone who has been, not in all cases, but I think in many cases, anyone who has been abused by a narcissist has had a parent who was a narcissist in their life, maybe both. In my case, I would say my mom was like the first, I would say, abuser narcissist in my life. And a video that I watched said, when you as a codependent or / empath, as some people say, but I would say codependent dates a narcissist, it's like one person saying, the narcissist is saying, I'll be your mother if you'll be my mother. And I'll say that again. If you'll be my mother, I'll be your mother. And what that means is the narcissist offers you a type of maternal love in the beginning, in a love bonding stage that you've never felt before, because you probably have never had an emotional connection with your mom or your dad, or maybe both. And you don't realize that there's a hole there, but there is, and this narcissist fills it. But the narcissist also says, like, not explicitly, but, says, I'll be your mother, but you also have to be my mother. And at the beginning, you're not really their mother. A lot of times it's them pouring a lot into you. But over time, when their mask starts to, I would say, drop, they're now expecting you to be their mother. And they're expecting you to show that maternal love that they probably, or I would say parental love, that they never got, right? Because they probably maybe were raised with a narcissistic mom. Maybe they weren't raised without a father. Maybe it was both within my situation. But eventually they stop being your mother, but they still expect you to be their mother. And that's where the abuse starts happening. And, they'll be financially abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, even physically abusive, because you're still holding on to that love bombing stage where they gave you that maternal love that you've never felt before, not right. Realizing it was all a performance from the very beginning. Right?
Yes, absolutely. There's so many things after hearing your story that I think people need to hear, especially about the healing process. So maybe if you're open to it, what we'll do is when this episode comes out, we'll do like a Instagram live just to talk about the healing part of it and understanding how us as empaths attract these narcissists. Because I agree with you, all of the work that I've done during my healing, learning from even, psychologist peers and everything that I've been reading about it stemming from a narc parent. And when you're raised by a narc parent, they don't provide the emotional, they don't provide for your emotional needs, not your wants, your emotional needs. So you're taught that your needs and your feelings don't matter. You're silenced. All of those things that a child should have from a parent. We didn't receive that, so that these narcs now come in pretending to be that person that's going to give us that. And they promise the world and the whole future faking and love bombing and all those things until they realize either that you're human, that you're not perfect, or that they find someone else to feed their narcissistic need. Then they discard you and have no use for you because they've moved on to their, next victim. But I definitely want listeners to, go and do their own research. And if you feel that you have a friend or loved one that has experienced financial abuse, narcissistic abuse, any form of abuse, share this episode with them. I feel like the awareness of these conversations needs to happen, even as a conversation starter, because not every woman is brave enough to even share the details of their story for another woman to say, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. So I just want to thank you, Nadine, for being so transparent, for being so open. You have no idea how many lives you're going to touch just by sharing what you've shared. And it will continue to snowball and touch others as people do their research into these things, so that they can help themselves and their loved ones. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us. I truly, truly appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm more than happy to chat about the next phase, about the healing process, because, as much as, yes, we can, talk about the abusers, and we're never going to, it's not about saying, okay, we're going to dissolve them from what they did. But at some point too, as codependents, we need to take accountability for our part in it, right? Not our part in the abuse, but our part as to our decision making as to why we chose these sort of partners in our lives, and looking deeper into well, maybe it's because it was comfortable for us. And why was it comfortable? How were we raised in terms of our environment and our parents, and how we were essentially groomed for abuse. And once we come to that awareness, saying, okay, I understand how I got here, but now how do I reprogram and recondition myself so I don't end up in the same situation again?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the part that I wanted to get into. And I realized time is disappeared and ran away from us. But that is a really, really important part of the healing process, because if we don't dig to the foundation and understand the why, then we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. So if we want to stop the cycle, the generational trauma and all those things, then we need to do the work. And the work isn't fun. It hurts. It took me a couple years to go through it, and it's ugly, but it's work that needs to be done so that we don't pass that on to the next generation.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much, Nadine. And to all of you legacy leavers out there, until next time, subscribe on all platforms, and don't forget to rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcast. We would love to hear what resonated with you from Nadine's story. Have you experienced this type of abuse? Do you know someone that has? We would love to hear your feedback. And I want to thank each and every one of you that continues to listen each and every week, that help the show to globally rank in the top 1.5% of most popular shows out of all podcasts. And that's almost 2.8 million. Feel free to screenshot this week's episode. You can tag Nadine at Nadine Liverpool. You can tag myself at The Real McKinney Smith, and continue to walk in greatness in your stilettos in a manner worthy of your calling.